Good afternoon. I think we can do a little bit more energy than that. Good afternoon. Okay. Good evening, I know. Well, that was great. That was way better. Before I start, I just want to make sure that everyone knows that this event is being recorded. If you would not like to be recorded, please check in with someone in the back that has a name tag, either from BWWC or MOWA. We just want to make sure that everyone knows that. And if anyone is in need of interpretation, we have interpreters here, so please make sure that you check in. We want to make sure that everyone has accessibility to be able to engage through our discussion tonight. Now we did some little housekeeping. Well, buenas noches. My name is Alexandra Valdez, and I proudly serve as the Executive Director of the Mayor's Office of Women's Advancement for our amazing Mayor, Michelle Wu. I would like to first of all thank our partners in making today possible, the Women's Workforce Council, and all the employers joining us today. Because of you, events like tonight are possible. In MOWA, we like to pride ourselves in empowering women from all walks of life, from economic equity, women's health, and representation. Today, April 20th, marks Boston Equal Pay Day, where women on average earn what their male colleagues earned by the end of last year. This data is analyzed and collected by our amazing partners of the Boston Women's Workforce Council. As much as we talk about numbers, I encourage each of you to also think about the underlying issues that come from the wage gap: affordability access, quality of education, childcare, accessibility for women of color, housing, and most importantly, equity and inclusion. As a Latina, issues like community, economic equity, and equal pay are so important. It just reminds me of so much to think about our immigrant communities and ourselves. When I first immigrated to the United States from the Dominican Republic at such a young age, learning the ins and outs, or better yet, having my parents explain to me the ins and outs of learning how to negotiate salaries, or even learning how to ask to have a better salary, was so taboo. And even to this day, when I talk to my mom about it, talk to parents, even talk to my own family, that's very taboo. And having conversations like the one we're going to have today with these amazing panelists are so important to think about how we're educating and how we're uplifting our communities. Assuring that women of color are being a part of the conversation is so important. By ensuring employers are hiring with intention is key to assure conversations like these are inclusive to everyone. Having conversations like the one we're going to have today with these panelists is essential, but most of all, assuring that we have employers like the one here taking the pledge to take a stand to help close the gender wage gap. And I thank you for being here. On behalf of our Mayor, Michelle Wu, we thank you for all the work being done to assure women, specifically women of color in our city, have a voice in every room, in every company, and most importantly, today. Now it's my pleasure to include a great partner of ours, Kim Borman, Executive Director of the Boston Women's Workforce Council. Thank you.
Thanks, Alexandra. And again, I want to, if anybody needs interpreters, they're at the right of me. As we've often discussed together, this difference in pay that Alexandra mentioned goes way beyond not being paid the same salary for same work. That's been illegal since 1963, and Massachusetts strengthened the law in 2018. It still happens, but perhaps not as much. We can hope, at least. What we believe truly magnifies the pay difference is something called the power gap, where women, and particularly BIPOC women, are not advanced at the same rate as men, and therefore never receive the senior salaries that could close those overwhelming gender and wage gaps, racial wage gaps. Boston employers are making strides to hire and advance a more diverse workforce, especially those of you here who are signers of 100% Talent Compact. We really thank you for your strong commitment. This power gap, however, is based on years of systemic barriers. And as my esteemed co-chairs often say, Evelyn Murphy, who is reparking her car because it was parked somewhere illegally, she thought, and Kathy Minahan, closing the gap will take true culture change, which does not happen overnight. Our panel is here today to share what has worked and what has not, so that employers can take home some ideas to try at their workplace and employees can hear about opportunities that might make job advancement easier to obtain. With that, I'd like to introduce our moderator today, Mary Skelton Roberts, who is a globally recognized leader and visionary on issues of climate, community, and equity. For many years, she was co-director of Climate at the Barr Foundation, where she developed strategies to protect the most vulnerable from the impact of climate change. She has extensive experience integrating diversity, equity, and inclusion into program strategy and change management practices. I will now hand it over to Mary to introduce the rest of our panel.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. It's so good to be here.
You just have to click. Yep, you have to click it on.
My first technical glitch. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, fabulous. Well, welcome. Again, I want to thank the Women's Workforce Council and the Mayor's Office of Women Advancement for this really important conversation. We're going to talk for about maybe an hour and listen to this great panel discuss what they've done in their organizations to really advance women in leadership and in organizations and to close the power gap that we just heard. I have the esteemed pleasure to introduce my panelists, and I'm going to start with Angela. She's interim president of Hack.Diversity. It's a regionally and nationally recognized nonprofit on a mission to transform the economy by breaking down barriers for Black and Latinx professionals in tech. They match professionals interested in tech with some of our largest tech companies across the world. So far, they've cultivated environments for approximately 400 tech fellows that not only enter and grow with the company, but they also lead with the innovation economy. So good to have you here. My other panelist is Trinh Nguyen. She serves as the Mayor Wu's Chief of Worker Empowerment. It's a newly formed cabinet that was created to advance the well-being of all working Bostonians in both the public and private sector. Since 2014, she's also been director of the Mayor's Office of Workforce Development, and in that role, she launched such initiatives as a tuition-free community college program, the Greater Boston American Apprenticeship, and career pathways leading to living wage jobs in the healthcare, clean energy, and construction sectors. She also created Boston Save, the city's children's saving account program, prior to her role at OWD. Welcome, good to have you here, Trinh. And Ron Taylor, who's Executive Vice President and Head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Natixis Investment Managers. And in this role, he is focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion activities and programs where he serves as the resource for their affiliates in the region to support all of the DEI efforts. He has 20 years experience leading DEI programs, primarily in the financial services industry. He joined the firm from Mizuho Americas, where he served as Managing Director, Head of Diversity and Inclusion. He's also worked for the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, Deutsche Bank, and KPMG. Welcome, good to have you. So we're gonna start with our panelists. They're gonna spend about 2-3 minutes giving you an overview of the work that they're doing and why it matters. And then I have a series of questions for them to get us going. And if we have time, I'd love to hear, see if we can get some questions from the audience as well. So let me start with you, Angela.
Great. Thank you, Mary, for that wonderful intro. I think you covered the mission of Hack very clearly. So we aim to transform the economy by breaking down barriers for Black and Latina professionals in tech, and we focus specifically on early career talent, particularly from non-traditional education pathways into the tech economy. And we think it's really important, especially in the technical field, to think about how we build wealth, generational wealth, and the opportunity to elevate folks from community colleges, from boot camps, from folks who are doing career pivots into these opportunities so that eventually folks are going to be able to support families and then also create businesses within the new industrial revolution that we're in. And we focus a lot with employer partners to first cultivate environments of racial equity and not just think about the numbers we're bringing in the door, but how can we hold accountable employer partners to think about processes, systems, and ability to think about pay parity, as well as promotion, evaluation for ideas and projects that get launched and started and invested in. So That's a bit about Hack.Diversity. We, by the end of this year, will have bridged about collectively 500 Hack Fellows into innovation economy careers. And we're excited to continue growing from there.
Great, thank you. I know you can't hear me. Can you hear me now? Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for the Boston Women's Council, Kim and Alex, for their fearless leadership year-round, every day, every second. So it's not just today that we should be celebrating equal pay for women. We should do it every single day. So thank you. I had the pleasure of working with a lot of you here, and I feel as if you can be here in my place to talk, because you've been in that field for so long, so I'm very honored to be here. As you know, we have a new mayor, not so new, but the first women and women of color in the city of Boston. That is so huge, and I can't tell you how that leadership leads to an image of knowing and feeling that there is change. And when there is that push and that inspiration, you go to work every single day looking at systems and meeting and training colleagues and changing the way we do business every day to be as inclusive as possible. And so I really want to acknowledge Mayor Wu for really putting bold ideas there. Now, change doesn't happen overnight. I mean, over 100 years, we've had either, I can't say, but white men in the role of mayors, and that system has to change over time. So I have the pleasure of serving as the mayor's chief of worker empowerment and workforce development. And within that, we do career pathways for adults and young people. So we make financial investments in training programs for young people, women, girls, and also dislocated workers or underemployed Boston residents, and moving them up the pipeline. In addition to those resources that we align, we also work closely with employers, because the public narrative can't just be training workers, that we really need to provide and engage employers the opportunity to align the talent pipeline that we have with the vacancies and the employer demand that's out there. And so we're really trying to mediate the labor market to make sure that it's fair, equitable, and inclusive. Happy to follow up on ways and models and research and evaluation that we've done over the years to make that happen. We have a lot more to do, and looking forward to continuing your partnership so that we can always tailor the day-to-day practices, programs, and policies to really be as inclusive as possible and really make that change in salary gaps, wage gaps, quality jobs for everyone in Boston. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. All right, so I will start with my disclaimer. Ron Taylor, any remarks I make today are my own and don't necessarily reflect Natixis investment managers or Natixis, the parent. Are we not allowed to talk about white men in this?
Not that I know of.
All right, then I'm going to go for it.
It wasn't in my notes, so you couldn't.
Thank you guys for having me. I always wonder why I get invited back to these things, because I am not going to pull punches. I've been doing this work now for 20 years. Before I got into this work, I was an accountant with KPMG. Before I got into that work, I was working, you might know the Jamaica, the Italian Home for Children in Jamaica Plains. So I was working there and loving that work, and decided I wanted to get into a higher tax bracket. So I went back to school at UMass and went for Big Six public accounting, not because of any love for accounting, but because accounting paid more than childcare, which I think to this day is absurd. Did that for a little bit. Chased my wife to New York. I caught her. That was about 25 years ago. And find myself now back with Natixis. And Natixis Investment Managers is based here in Boston. We're in the Prudential Center. Relatively small investment manager group. I manage about 500 people there. But Natixis, the brand, is much larger and based in Paris. The interesting, I think, sort of piece to my story is I actually still live in Central Jersey. I live down on the Jersey Shore, and I come up to work for Natixis, I fly up every week and, have my apartment, and then I fly back and pick up dog poop in the backyard. And there's a reason I do that, and I can't wait to get into why I do that, because I think when I think about diversity and all the different things that I've done, there's been like this, it's almost like baking a cake, like you need the right ingredients to do it right. And if you don't have the right ingredients, you'll never have the right cake. So the employee commitment, passion for driving diversity and change, whether it's gender, ethnicity, has always been there. That's never been like a question. People want to do better and want to. And then you talk about leadership commitment. And, I don't think anybody would argue that you need leadership commitment to move the needle anywhere. But I think what I've discovered in my 20-some-odd years of doing this is that how that leadership commitment shows up is a huge difference maker. So if they're writing a check and saying, go off and do your Heritage Month stuff over there and, we'll see you next year, doesn't really work. So you really, truly I really, truly need leaders that show up, roll up their sleeves, vulnerable, willing to say they don't know, which was always a big taboo, especially like Wall Street and some of the other places, and to really be part of the work. And that's what I'm finding at Natixis. So that's why I pack up from my family. I have a 17-year-old daughter who's graduating high school this year. My wife is, they don't need me. I was telling the panelists that when I go back tomorrow afternoon, they'll ignore me for like a half a day. And so, but I'm excited to be here and excited to tell you more about why I think it works at Natixis.
Great. So you can tell this is going to be a wonderful, wonderful conversation. So our session is called Bridging Opportunity Gaps in Hiring and Advancement for Women and Marginalized Workers. When you are looking at bringing people, diverse people into your organization, you're really thinking about different stages, how you're hiring and recruiting, how you're doing advancement, how you're retaining, and all the elements that go into that. So I want to start with my first question to the panelists around hiring and recruiting, because first you got to get people in the door. What has your organization done or seen that's worked in creating an inclusive hiring and recruiting process? Because we often hear we don't have the right people, or we can't find folks, or they're not available, they don't have the right training. What has your organization done? I'm going to start with you, Ron, and then we're going to come down.
Yeah, I'll talk really quickly. Well, I'll tell you what they've done since I've been there the last 14, 15 months is we've shifted away from the metrics as the only sort of measurement. So it's, set some targets and say, we want to be X percentage of this or X percentage of that by year or whatever. And I've really kind of shifted the conversation away from that, because while metrics are important and you do want to have folks, how many folks want to be 27% for our gender representation? Who wants to be numbered 27%? Nobody wants to be thought of as a number. So it shouldn't just be a numbers game. So one of the things I've done is shifted that conversation to metrics as a conversation starter. And I'll never talk about that. We can have aspirations for how we want to diversify our workforce, but that has to be the first step. It's like once folks come in, what else are we doing to make sure that they're supported, that they're getting the resources that they need, that they're getting the voice, a seat at the table? So that has to be one holistic conversation. So that's one thing that I know it shifted slowly, and Mary, you said it's not something, or Trinh, I think you said it doesn't happen overnight, but that mentality of like targets, and I'm not a huge fan of targets, has to shift. It has to be about the person, the individual, unless all, and I don't think this is the case, all African-American males and all women are the exact same, and it doesn't matter who comes in, as long as you've got that percentage, then there needs to be a different conversation. So that's the conversation I'm really driving within Natixis. It's like, we're not hiring a percentage or a number, we're hiring a person. Who is that person?
But how do we make sure that there's opportunity for that person to even get in the door? So let's start there.
Yep.
I mean, I know you say you don't want to look at metrics, but how do we get people in the door? And anyone who wants to answer that.
Sorry, I'll finish, because I
Yep.
feel like I didn't answer your first
Yep.
question, but I'll just simply, some of the things that were in place even before I got to Natixis. So something as simple as looking at job recs and the wording in job recs. Like, that was stuff that they had started doing before I even got there. Making sure there are diverse interview panels. So if somebody's coming in for, if a woman or a person of color is coming in for a sales opportunity, they're not just coming across all of the straight white males in the Patagonias. So making sure that there's some diversity in who's coming in, and just like through the rest of that process. So not like, okay, you're in, but what else do we have to do with onboarding? What else do we have to make sure that they know, like, there are these resources, these different things going on within the organization? But I think little things. There's nothing rocket science about this, but it is complicated, and you do have to definitely be intentional with a lot of the work that you're doing.
Great. And Trinh?
Yeah, I'm just going to quickly talk about specific examples. I know we've filed for bills, we've done a variety of pushes, advocacies, but there are a few things I think that they could be used tools and very definitive case studies. So one is that we really focus on job quality. So it's just not working with BIPOC residents who are working low-wage jobs and moving them into another low-wage job. So job quality and employer engagement and commitment to those jobs are really important. And so some specific example is that Boston was very fortunate enough to be one of 23 grant recipient with the Commerce Department to win a $23 million grant to place 4,618 Boston residents into good-paying jobs over 3 years. Now, look, $23 million is not going to solve systemic issues, but it is a case study in which we can look. And some of the practices that we've worked with employers in the three key growth industries: healthcare, clean energy, and childcare. We know that there are low-wage jobs, and we don't want them for our graduates. And so what we did was we used Burning Glass analytics, which gives us thousands of the vacant jobs. We analyzed the job titles. We looked at the salary grades. We not only did that, but we talked to hiring managers and said, what does this mean to get Boston residents hired if they got the competencies that you need? Now, mind you, this is not those who have a bachelor's degree. So we also looked at salary, upward mobility, and ability, employer-sponsored pensions and benefits. So those were some of the tools in which we are using, and we were able to negotiate that because we've had good relationships with great employers. There are some, and we need more of that to step up to go to a scalable area. The second piece,
Can I just,
quickly,
quick
yeah.
question, can you give us some examples of where you placed people?
Well, we just started. We've had specific placements with MGB, for example, with the medical assistant positions, and we know that CNAs are a lot out there, but we don't want to train any more CNAs, but we want to work with CNAs and move them up that ladder, either be interpreters at the hospitals and or lab technicians. Now this one is being launched as we speak for a 3-year evaluation. We need to meet 4,618, and if we don't, shame on us. And so we need to be accountable on that. The second piece is that there are good practices documented, employment agreements into development agreements with 2 major hotels in the Seaport district, where we knew that room attendants, housekeeping, I know that everybody assumes that that is low-wage jobs. They are low-wage jobs, but if we make them good-paying jobs, they're not. My parents came here as dishwashers for 30 years. They wanted to be dishwashers, and it's okay, but those jobs had to work with integrity. They had to be good quality jobs. And so we had negotiated with the hotels and labor to design a training program for Boston residents into those jobs with great benefits, a room attendant getting paid starting salary of $48,000 to $53,000 plus $10,000 of home ownership down payment. That's the kind of jobs that we also, a model that we also choose, and that is really focusing on making low-wage jobs good quality jobs, because we know we need them. Our last and our final example, and we have several, is, as you know, Mayor Wu, back in December 20th, we partnered with Mass Bio. And what we wanted to do is really talked about, we have about, I don't have the notes on this, but I think 7.1 million more, I think, square footage of lab space. Great lab science, mass bio ed, a variety of great jobs. Are those jobs good for our people? And will Boston residents who don't have a bachelor's degree enter into those fields? And so Mayor Wu wanted to do a challenge, wanted to say, put it out there. We want 1,000 Boston residents who don't have a bachelor's degree, BIPOC, from the neighborhoods of Boston into life sciences jobs, 1,000 by 2025. We needed that commitment from employers, and we put $10 million down as a down payment on that investment. The money's great, but the jobs are better for our people. And so those are some of the examples and the tools that we have.
Great. So really using public sector resources to both test good, better paying jobs and opportunities across different sectors. I love that. So you are specifically focused on bringing Black and Latinx into the tech field. Tell us how you're doing that and what that looks like.
Yeah, we have a very kind of narrow focus. And fundamentally, we believe that talent is distributed, but opportunity is not. And that is how we think about our recruitment for our fellows and how we elevate talent to employer partners. And so we can expand the aperture of course, everyone is recruiting from MIT. Of course, everybody is recruiting from Northeastern. But the smartest person at Roxbury Community College or North Shore Community College can be smarter than the smartest person at MIT. And when you think about what makes an MIT candidate different from a Roxbury Community College candidate, a lot of times it boils down to opportunity and all the systemic barriers in place to even be eligible to get into MIT, not just purely based on smartness. And we have to think about how often we code pedigree as ability. And we focus on that concept. So we go to where talent is. So if your focus is women, if your focus is Black and Latina talent, you look at where the education programs are most accessible, whether it's financially, geographically, what have you, to those communities, and invest in those communities and invest in those education pathways. So that's our fundamental focus on recruitment.
And can you tell us what the profile, if you have one, of the people that go into your program look like?
Sure. So from an all our fellows self-identify as Black or Latina, and all are consistently pursuing first jobs in technical fields. So primarily software engineering, mechanical engineering, and data engineering. And we specifically focus on those career tracks because of the opportunity to, in one generation, make six figures. And again, we focus a lot on generational wealth building and how there's opportunity for families to really change how much they can then participate in economic well-being and share profit with their employers. So our fellows from an education background, we don't have any cutoff from a minimum education. So the makeup of our cohort this year, and consistently year over year, this is our seventh cycle in Boston, is maybe 50% of folks pursuing bachelor's degrees, and then the other 50% are a mixture of community colleges, boot camps, folks going through career transitions, so continuing education programs, self-taught learners. And as a nature of that, it also challenges the archetype of what we think about when we think about a software engineer. So not only Black and Latina, but also age. So because of our different education inclusiveness, our age range is consistently year over year, and our cohort is early 20s all the way up to early 50s. And the average, the median age, I would say, is the late 20s, which again, really challenges the thought of, okay, a software engineering intern, I think about it, historically in this way, but we really want to blow that up and make sure that employers are not prematurely filtering out exclusionary thinking when we think about what is a BS degree, what does that qualify
Yeah.
us for?
So let's go there, because you're all talking about the same thing, right? How do you decode pedigree? How do you start thinking about language that's coded that prevents people from applying and getting into positions? How do you start thinking about reframing what a good quality job? What else are you looking at? What other barriers are you breaking as you're thinking about the work you're doing?
Yeah, I wanted to comment on what Angela was just saying, because it was coming across as so personal. How many of you remember New Edition? So I grew up across the hall from Ricky Bell in Orchard Park. So those my first 14 years, and I was telling folks that I was getting nostalgic even coming here to this building, but it's that, that image of, what good looks like. So there's a picture, there's a Boston Globe article from the 70s, and it's a stark black and white picture of the corner of Adams and Eustis Street. And it's literally the street I grew up on. And I use that in my stories. So when I'm talking to the folks that say, well, you can't be a CPA, you can't be an accountant. Like, yeah, I can. And so I'm constantly pushing through that image of what good looks like and what good is. I remember being on Wall Street and everybody it seemed like went to Cornell. I don't know why, because a lot of them weren't doing a whole bunch of stuff, but there was this image that if you wanted to work on Wall Street, you had to go to an Ivy. You had to, and I just, smashing through that, challenging that on a daily basis. I love what you said. It's like, it's not that the capacity's not there. It's not that I don't know how to do it. I just don't know how to do it. Nobody's shown me, but you show me, and I'm going to get it done. I think that's true for a lot of our talent coming up.
One of the things that we've done and learned from different industries, but the most recent is the life sciences one. I'm saying that because we're doing this as we speak, is that, and we all know that life sciences is the most elitist, exclusive workforce to break into. And so one of the things that we did do is, and we found is that, the president and CEO and executive commitment should be there, hands down. But that commitment needs to be operationalized up and down that supply chain, particularly hiring managers. And so we spotted a couple of major life sciences employers, one of them notably Vertex and Moderna. And they are going to be, our strategy is to work with them to be champion employers. Because in the last year and a half, what they did was they went through job audits and job reviews for entry-level positions. And what they did was work with their hiring managers and went from one job, every single job. And what they did was, do we need a bachelor's degree? What competencies do we really need? And they took that out and found that 10%, at least 10% of their overall workforce positions don't need a bachelor's degree. And then what they did was they start to work with community colleges, workforce training agencies to design a workforce pipeline that meets their needs. And they're finding that that's not only value-based, good practice, good business for their workforce hiring strategy. So we're looking at that 10% as a standard because we tested with different employers, and we want to make sure that every employers are looking at, and hiring managers are looking at specific jobs and while they're posting.
Yeah. So let's talk about once you have hired people and they're in the organizations, how are we helping them advance? What are you seeing happening? What are some best practices?
You're asking some hard
I
questions.
know, but that's why
oh my
we're here.
gosh.
Let's start with
She's
you,
tough,
Angela.
isn't she?
Yeah.
My goodness. I want the audience to step up and ask some questions. She's tough.
They might be tougher.
Yeah. Well, again, so we focus pretty narrowly on like first jobs in technical functions, so engineering functions. And I think one of the fallacies when people become people managers is you're like good at your job, and then you get promoted into being a manager of someone without any sort of training or any sort of like certification or any sort of like accountability. And I think that's what part of our racial equity, diversity, inclusion programming we focus on with employer partners is holding a level of standard to be an inclusive people manager, because there's, especially for a first job, there's so much that makes or breaks your belonging in the industry, and whether you can see yourself being part of this industry for years, right? So we focus a lot on people managers and the power that people managers hold to invest, give feedback, invest in terms of professional development and critical and constructive feedback, as well as affirmative feedback, and then also sponsorship. So how do we make sure that in a meeting we're affirming ideas, encouraging ideas of minorities, women, and inviting folks into the room, and not just waiting on people to ask. So giving an opportunity for people managers to really open the door, hold open the door, and pull people in.
But you're also talking about creating the conditions for people managers to succeed. So it's not just about moving them into those positions, it's ensuring that they're trained and mentored and they know how to give feedback and all the essential skills needed in that role. Ron, I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, I mean, I just totally agree with that. I sometimes feel bad for the people managers because we do kind of thrust them into that role with no tools and resources to get the job done, and it's kind of like, it's set up for failure. So we do spend a lot of time with the people managers, giving them some place to practice some of the things that we preach. So it's not just like a LinkedIn Learning or going through a training and getting the 80% and go off and like do that thing, but really trying to create safe spaces where they can be vulnerable, where they can make the mistakes, where they can practice being an inclusive leader, which is not always the easiest thing to do. You're talking about empathy, you're talking about awareness, you're talking about situational awareness. Do you have introverts and extroverts in the room? Are you paying more attention to the extrovert? Giving them sort of, again, the tools, resources to manage that kind of environment, I think is key. And so, yes, they get beat up a lot. They're the icy middle is sometimes what they're called, because they got their employees pushing up on them, they got leadership pushing down, and they're just like, I just need to get my job done. But to get their job done most effectively, they have to have the tools, they have to have the resources, so.
Great.
Yeah, I'm going to just quickly shift from those who have a bachelor's degree into a different strategy, which is how do you integrate DEI into the workforce up and down the supply chain. I'm just going to be real here, and I think everybody knows you all are really smart, super smart, smarter than I am. You're not going to work in a place that don't look like you. Period. I mean, everybody's too smart for that because, now, I looked at the Wall Street Journal, the Globe poll, Suffolk polls, and studied what, younger millennial and what the workforce is looking for post-COVID. And everybody looks for values in their employers' statements. Everybody looks for a culture, and they want diversity in a real way. And, this sounds like a broken record, and it's not like it's a new STEM research science that I am articulating. We need people of color on leadership boards, and we need them more than just 10%, 25%. We need them to be a significant majority. And those who don't look like us, it's okay, like Caucasian or white folks, need to buy in a real way that's not just a target. It is a target numerically, but a real way in terms of accountability and practice, and really meeting those metrics in a quarterly way in which people can see that progress. We've heard that strategy many times. We need to do it. And that, for board leadership, executive leadership, I have to say, I would not work for an agency if a Ron wasn't there. I can take my business and my talent somewhere else. And that's the choice that workers have. And considering this tight labor market, they have that empowered feeling to walk away if employers don't have the kind of value statement in which they believe in and they're waiting for and have waited for decades.
So let's go deep. How do we know when it's real? You're saying that there's a certain level, there's values and there's expectations and there's diversity, but how do people tell what's real from not?
I think you ask the employees. So I think we focus a lot on the difference between intent and impact with our employer partners. So everyone is partnered with Hack because they have the intention. They care about racial equity. They care about parity, pay, all of that. But then what are your actions demonstrating? And are you willing to be put it out there, be transparent about it, and be vulnerable when you're making mistakes? Because I think lands way more authentically if you say, here are my goals and here's what the things you tried and our setbacks, and here's how we're moving forward, and being honest about that. And then also asking your employees, hey, this is my intention, is this being experienced by you? And just, again, being very clear, when we think about like pay and I think promotion is really important. I forget who brought it up earlier around like the power differential, I think it was Kim, the opportunity to be advanced. And sometimes those conversations happen behind closed doors. So instead of being like, hey, this person got promoted and you didn't even realize that was even an option, be transparent about, hey, there's a spot, everyone should submit and apply for this spot, and then let's be transparent about this process so that we can truly evaluate who is the best person to be elevated, and not just because you happen to know about the opportunity, you get like a leg up, or there's this unspoken like kind of social capital that you're familiar with, and that's how you get a leg up versus everyone being on the same page and having the same information.
Yeah. Ron?
Yeah, I was just going to add one thing to something that Trinh said. Somebody has to be first. So while you might look at an organization and say, I'm not going there, there's no black people there. Somebody's going to trigger that fight versus that flight. And I'll actually make it personal. So I went from residential treatment, working with kids, decided at the age of 30-something that I wanted to go back to school for a degree in accounting, because accounting was going to pay me $32,000 a year coming out of undergrad. No experience, no, father figure or uncle or somebody saying, well, this is exactly what you need to do to get in there, and da-da-da-da. My questions were really pointed. So when I looked at the six accounting firms that were here, my questions were, where are your black people? And I asked every single one of those firms that question. I got involved with the National Association of Black Accountants, so I got some rounding there, but my question was very direct. I wanted to know that I was coming in to an organization where I at least had a chance to be successful. They didn't have to guarantee the success. So I think the direct question is, for that fight that you might, somebody wants to be first. I can tell you that the firm that I chose, KPMG, ultimately went on and did some incredible things. And they're still working. But they, early 90s, they were doing things with the KPMG network of women. And in the late 90s, we started some of the African-American Latino networks that are now the national model for KPMG. So, asking those direct questions for me was like, I don't want to go someplace where I'm just going to be a number, or I'm just going to be the guy that sits in, I almost referenced a book from the 70s, the guy that sits in the corner, sits by the door. I really want to know that I'm going someplace where I'm going to have an impact and I'm going to make a difference. So I look at everybody coming into Natixis or any organization I'm working with, and I'm saying that person wants that same experience. How do we make sure we give that to them?
Yeah. I want to build on that. So there's a younger generation that's come in and done amazing work, really pushing not just organizations, but society to be held accountable for a more equitable and diverse world. How has DEI changed in the workforce as a result of sort of some of the external pressures? What have you seen in your careers? I'm going to start with you, Ron. And then
Okay. Yeah, I think, when I first decided to stop doing the accounting back in 2002 and transfer it into diversity full-time, all the focus was on the diversity piece. Equity wasn't even in the equation. It was diversity and inclusion, but nobody really knew what inclusion was. We just wanted to drive the numbers up. Then you saw a little bit of a shift where you did see inclusion starting to be more of that conversation. So now you're in, how do we make sure take a seat, but just be quiet. That was sort of the shift. And I was like, okay, you can talk, but only if you say things that I agree with. And so you saw these slow shifts. And I think in 2020 with the murder of George Floyd, which wasn't the first time that happened, there was a real kind of awakening that the system is broken. And the system is broken. And we're talking about a system that was designed by and for a certain demographic. and now we're trying to like make this system whole and just, and so that is lost. I cannot talk about George Floyd to this day without getting, and I know there have been a lot of cases, but so it's looking at the system, it's looking at, I completely lost my thought. Go ahead.
It's okay, it was good, though. What you said was powerful.
You know, it's amazing that we're still here,
Yeah.
is the question. And the thing that gets me, I was joking with Trinh that I would do this work for, this is being recorded, so I'm not going to say it, because it's so important. And it's baffling to me that we're still here, but I do think we've made incremental progress. I think to the comments around leadership that actually will get involved and will roll up their sleeves and will be vulnerable and will not just like write a check. That's what we need.
Trinh, what's been your experience?
Well, I actually aspire to Ron because I'm the opposite. I love my job, don't get me wrong, but I feel a sense of frustration just because I feel like we're at the space constantly. And so the frustration comes from the fact that are we moving the needle and what would it take? It's very unfortunate that we have to wait until somebody gets shot to do something of a culture shift. It's very uncivilized for us to wait until somebody gets beaten, and a tragic story to make us move. I just think it's uncivilized. It's very frustrating. I still love my job, but I still get frustrated. The other piece is that, I just think that when I walk into a place where I look at an employer, you have baseline knowledge and data. That's what we do as human beings. When you see people of color in entry-level jobs, like an overwhelming number of them, who are on the bottom of the pay scale, that's wrong. If you see that, plus a paradigm in a dynamic that it is overwhelmingly white executives who are getting paid quadruple, plus bonuses, plus whatever, that's just wrong. And you don't need scientists or run randomized control studies over and over to know that that is wrong. And so we need to, data is really important, and we see it, but we need to move on that. And I'm talking to employers and hiring managers to see that, because when I said in my opening statement, to see that leadership and to feel that, that's what it takes to go in every single day to make those incremental changes so that quarterly, annual, and long-term change can happen. And I just want to say this, DEI is not getting someone from a preppy school, from an Ivy League college, a Vietnamese who's a valedictorian from an Ivy League school. Yes, I went to MIT, but I'm not a valedictorian. I was a bad kid in high school. It is not cream of the crop picking. That's cheating and placing it. It is really intentionally thinking about a model and seeing strategically how do you create that infrastructure and then going to hire people who can deliver that for you. And to me, that's more intentional. And finally, I do want to say that what's frustrating to me is change takes a long time. After 8 years of screaming and yelling and hollering at people, our agency no longer hires, no matter what you do, anyone full-time less than $60,000 without benefits. Now, a lot of people would say, oh, you should have done that yesterday. Yes, we tried that, but it took 8 years to do that, and that's too long. So we need to figure out a way in which we can catch up, do what we need to do, and figure out the loopholes that benefit all the great people, but figure out those loopholes and re-engineer it to really bring the equity and inclusion piece. And only then will we get it to a pace and level that is somewhat satisfactory.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, just to kind of maybe concisely add on to, layer on to Ron and Trinh, I think in an optimistic way, we're now able to be bolder in our ask and demand. Because I remember back when Black Lives Matter was just gaining traction, it was controversial for a company to say, yes, I support Black Lives Matter. And then very transparently, even Hack at the time, like back, I don't even know, but we were debating, okay, can we tweet out Black Lives Matter? Will that cancel our opportunities for fellows? Because some of our employer partners might not partner with us if we do that, and that will take away employment opportunities from our fellows, so it's kind of self-cannibalization. And now I think it's much more celebrated to have a stake in the ground and share your values publicly that way, and then employees and prospective employees make a decision for themselves and what kind of employers they want to work with, right? But I think on the other end, what I feel like how DI has changed in a negative way in an industry is it's become industrialized. It's a flashpoint, and I think our attention spans are so short that we think about like gun control, right? Like every day in the news, there's another story, and people kind of react, and then it dies down. It dies down, and then it kind of starts losing the significance of sustained momentum, which I think DEI necessitates, and equity necessitates. Like this can't be solved in a year, 2 years, like 5 years. People need to be intentional to sustain resources and time, because this is a centuries-old problem.
I think what leaders can do differently, so you see a lot of times DE&I is positioned either someplace within HR or under talent management. One of the things that really attracted me to Natixis is I report directly to the CEO. It's not, he's a great guy. I remember sitting with him the first time and going back and saying I could really work with this guy, not for this guy, with this guy. Positioning it correctly. And, companies that are taking it seriously are doing that. So I'm one of 12 at the table. We actually had a really interesting conversation earlier today where somebody was going down the path of describing something that sounded like, and it wasn't, redlining. And I just had to go and kind of interrupt and take the conversation back where it needed to be. But, having that seat at the table, having that constant voice, being able to, not just, okay, well, it's Black Heritage Month, let's go get Ron so we can figure out, what speaker's going to come this month. I have nothing against Heritage Months, but you will never see me planning one. And I'll let our employees, will get behind that. I also shift their narrative. It's 20% on Heritage Month, 80% on the other stuff that's really going to make a difference.
Yeah. So speaking of making a difference, today is Equal Pay Day, and this is the Women's Forum. As you start looking at some of the data, we still see the inequity in pay. We see women are joining the workforces in higher numbers, and they're still at the bottom of the pay scale. So talk a little, I see your face, Trinh, it's painful. It's painful. So let's talk about that. What can we do? What are you doing, or what are you seeing that are best practices, and any takeaways for us?
I'll just say quickly that, COVID is just a huge impact. I mean, there's some great things that go about it in changing the ecosystem for women, but, I won't go for time's sake. Childcare is big, and I just don't get it. Childcare is a respected industry, a needed one, and if we want women back in the workforce, and it is a driving force, we need to focus on childcare. And it's not just a back-end system. It's not just get anybody to do childcare. We need to respect the industry to give good quality pay, flexibility, and affordability for everyone. So someone who's working 2 or 3 jobs can afford the same childcare as someone who has an executive management level. So that needs to be fixed. I don't have an answer to it. I think there's some models around that. The city of Boston has a child care facility inside the workplace, and I think there are some innovative models, but we need a scalable approach, and we need to say child care matters.
Yeah. So I want to build on that, because I was in the car yesterday. If anybody heard this story, raise your hand. But I was in the car yesterday, and they were talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I can't remember if it was in the hotel business, but they were saying many women were leaving their jobs. Did you hear this story? You're shaking your head. Did you hear this? And so what they did was they surveyed the women, and what they realized was they couldn't start their jobs before 8 a.m. because they had to get the children to school. And once they gave them flexibility and they started the workday at 10 o'clock, they were able to retain more women in their work, in the hotel business, or I think this was a hotel, I don't even remember what sector it was. But again, like tailoring your work and your hours to the employees that you have was one, I thought it was so innovative. Anything else that you're seeing that worked?
No, I would just say, drilling down to those companies that say, well, we want 40% women by XXX, why? You know, and really kind of challenging them, why do you want that? Well, it's the right thing to do. Why is it the right thing to do? And then, how do you do it? Like the little things, and it's interesting. I mentioned my daughter is selecting her colleges now, and we did like an informational yesterday, and they were talking about all these other things outside of just tuition and room and board that you need to think about. Like, is there an urgent care here? Is this, is that? And all these things, and I'm like, wow, I thought we had it covered. And there were all these questions, and I think the same thing for employers. It's like, yep, we've got the women in, we've got our 27%, we'll have 35% by next year, but dang, they're leaving. So we gotta ramp up our hiring because something's wrong on the back end. You gotta ask the why questions on the back end. I think that that's super important.
Really, really good.
I also think on the opposite end, how do we make sure we're not, like if women do decide to take a step back and because of life priorities, how do we make sure they're not penalized if they're re-entering the workforce? So instead of like them maybe taking a step, like a lower pay or like, you know, being demoted, so to speak, how can they make, how do we make sure we're able to continue that elevation pace and cadence and holding space for that?
Yeah, talk about people management. Raising kids is a full-time people management job. Let's give mom some credit for that. Let's take questions from you. Any questions?
Can you just say your name and where you're from?
Say your
and-
name.
Yeah.
Actually, if we could
So we
ask you
can
to come
hear
up
you.
to the mic, that would be great. Thank you.
Scott Lubell, UMass Memorial. So the point you just made about people stepping out of the workforce for years to raise children, then coming back without losing their, call it their place in terms of pay. So under Mass Equal Pay Act, we're looking at experience. And, you know, so we're trying to look at, you know, people with X number of years of experience are paid comparably. So how do we do that if we were going to keep people who have left the workforce for a number of years and have them keep their place? So.
You know, one of the things we did, you know, and I'm not saying that this tool works. Everybody knows the comparative market studies. One of the things that, tools that we use, and I'm not in the HR department, we really forced our HR department to really look at that, because if not, we're going to lose a lot of people. And using those standards and having constant research and trends and looking at different places to do that comp study is so important. And we had to change, really push HR and our finance department to say, you can't pay people like that when they're coming in. I don't care where you're gonna get them. I don't care if they're out of the labor force. Really advocating for that bottom line so that someone coming in with that experience can start at this level instead of starting them down here. So it's not that we don't appreciate seniority. This is why I'm saying comp studies could be used in a tailored way, but it's also internal advocacy. And I'm not saying that HR departments are bad. I'm just saying some of its policies are very archaic, and I don't experience some innovative thinking within HR. And if it does, it comes from management. And it would be nice to get an HR director or a CFO that's innovative or forward-thinking, but it's hard to mix and mingle that. And if you have a combination of that, or if you're in a leadership role, you can request building that and getting people in those positions to advocate all at once. It cannot just be one department, one comp study. It has to be that kind of approach. That's the one we took, and that's the first step. There's gonna be another comp study in a year and a half.
Any other questions?
Thank you. Shout out to Ron, fellow UMass Boston alum. I just checked you out on LinkedIn. Well, it's a pleasure to listen to all of you. My name is Adesua Ibinerek. I work at Suffolk University. And my question, and I think any of you can answer this, is how do you support middle managers or hiring managers to help improve not only diversity, equity, and inclusion, but hiring practices? Because we know, especially Ron, you've done recruiting, right? Mm-hmm. You bring in the best talents, and they're from all cultures, races, whatever. But that person is going to make that hiring decision, right? Yep. And for you, Angela, you're bringing in amazing talent, but the hiring managers are the ones to support these candidates when it comes to progression, supporting them when it comes to getting them acquainted to the organizations. How do you really get hiring managers to be the champions of DEI?
That's a great question, and yes, UMass Boston was a great school. It's for hiring managers, and I did an exercise once it wasn't with Natixis, at a previous company, where we did a diversity walk. And we just looked at, okay, of all of the qualified candidates that we're putting into the process for interviews, we broke it down and looked at them by gender and ethnicity, and we walked right through the process, right through offer acceptance. And what we found was that the diversity moved up, they got in to the pipeline. They moved through that first round interview. And then that second round interview, and we tied that to hiring managers' risk reward. And the risk of hiring somebody that's different than me, and we're at this late stage, and this is all going to be on me if this doesn't work out, they would revert to what they knew. And so we saw a lot of that diverse talent falling out at that second interview stage. And so we put some emphasis there to really help hiring managers to understand that, there's a reward that comes with this, and less of the risk that they were sort of worried about. A lot of it ties back to unconscious bias too, and folks are like, well, we've been talking about that for years. But I think how we've effectively tried to mitigate unconscious bias and the processes and the systems and everything else, it's a constant. It's not a one and done. It's not you bring in a trainer and they take you through it and you're fixed. So I think more emphasis there, even though we've been talking about it for 20 years, is gonna help.
Yeah. One of the best practices I've seen emerge is that a hiring manager doesn't do the hiring by him or herself, that it's done by committee, including members of the DEI team, so you're more likely to catch some of the biases you're seeing, and you're also sharing both the risk and the responsibility for that person's success.
Yeah. And just to layer onto that, so something we do with our employer partners is we collect feedback from all their candidates, and we evaluate employer partners based on feedback of the candidate experience as well. So it's not just about the numbers, because that's the difference between diversity and inclusion, right? It's not just about the quota or the quantitative, it's about the qualitative. Is there a big difference between your Black candidate's experience and your white candidate's experience or Asian candidate's experience, and what is the balance there of success in the role, but then also for the folks that you don't hire, are they willing to endorse you as a company to their communities to bring even more folks in the door? So
I also think that sometimes there's this perceived notion that if you hire BIPOC or if you're prioritizing DEI, it equates to a compromise in integrity and quality. And sometimes it's not stated, but it's felt. So that public narrative, I'm sure it's part of embedded the culture in employers. But some of the tools that I think has worked is what we call registered apprenticeships, internships, learn and earn models, where employers actually work with workforce training and community college partners to design a curriculum that works for them and figure out what the hiring pipeline looks like. And then it is a shared cost model in terms of supportive services coaching in 3 to 6 months. And then if the employers see that that's the candidate for them, they do direct hires. And we found very good outcomes with that model. And so that's something that folks have looked into. But again, it has to be scalable. It has to be more innovative and approachable for employers. Because if you're looking at the public narrative and the scalable model in the labor market right now, it's like volume, like tons of resumes into these portals, and hiring managers are just seeing numbers or they're seeing paper, but they're not understanding the context in which they're hiring.
Yeah, great. We have time for one more question.
Could we have an easy question?
All right.
Like,
Can we do
what's your
two?
best recipe?
You want to do 2?
Yeah.
Okay.
Squeeze two.
We have time for 2 questions.
Feel
Do you
like that's
know,
a
is there
great
somebody
question.
else you want?
I
Okay.
thought I saw another hand.
I saw
going
2
up.
more hands.
So here's one.
Okay, so
Let's
Good
do
evening,
3.
everyone. My name is William Tomlinson. I'm a director of Boston University's Software and Application Innovation Lab. I'm an engineer by trade, so I always think about data, and although data is not the end-all, be-all, but I'm interested to know if you all have any strategies for talking with the powers that be at your various organizations to not only collect, encompassing collecting, sharing, and tracking data that gives us state of the affairs of the DEI climate at your various institutions. Right? I think, to me, that's a conversation that I think a point was made earlier about how do you tell if someone's serious about this type of work. So I'm interested in those kind of strategies to.
Yeah,
for that.
to my earlier comments around the data, and yes, we look at the data and like analytics, and we are still an asset management company, so the data is super important, but I'll never have a meeting where it's just going in with the data and saying, you know what, last quarter we had 2.3% African Americans, and this quarter we got 2.5. Jim, give yourself a raise. It just doesn't work that way. So that conversation is always part of the conversation. But it's like, okay, well, we put these new programs in place last quarter to try and drive retention or development or promotions. How are those programs actually correlating to what we, so it's always a longer narrative around the data. I mean, a CPA, so it's numbers. You know, you can't pretend that like companies that make, you know, trillions of dollars aren't going to look at numbers. Any other thing, my only challenge with it is really any other issue where you're told that you will be more profitable and do better with diverse and inclusive work teams, and you still don't have diverse, and I just don't get that part of it. So, longer answer to your question, but yes, the data is important as a starting point for me.
Yeah, and there are some industry-wide coalitions, so happy to follow up afterwards and share some of those. But I think the Caper Center does a lot of studies associated with that. And I think a lot of tech companies nowadays, again, because of the accountability piece, they are producing their own reports. But I think there's a lot of room to be transparent.
I mean, on the city's standpoint, I mean, for the procurement department and Chief Iduwu for economic development, we're working with the auditing department, treasury, and procurement on putting priorities in scoring when you're doing business with the city. So you get a large percentage of score if you want that vendor contract.
yeah, in my role as a senior vice president, I was responsible for the whole North America program. And when I disaggregated the data, so great numbers on diversity and inclusion, and when I disaggregated the data, 2 things stuck out for me. Our organization had not hired one black man. They had done 30 hires and had not hired one. They had hired plenty of people of color, but not one black man in the last 6 months, and that women were overrepresented in the administrative roles. I mean, so disaggregating the data is really important because it also helps you understand what the trends are or where they're falling short or where they're doing well.
And not just the data coming in, but the data going out
Yep.
too. So the folks that are leaving the organization, looking at that as well. And
Great.
one suggestion that I'm making or putting forward now is better exit interviews. You know, the HR exit interviews, why are you leaving? Better opportunities. Okay, go. Need a better system for collecting why folks are actually moving around.
Yeah.
Sure, thank you. I'd love to follow up with that later. I think more pointedly, I was more so talking about passing that data from the top down. So does the individual contributor have access to the data that reflects the real state of things as opposed to the people who sit next to the CEO and have the conversation on the daily, but it's important to push that as far down as you can with less of the the fluff and the marketing spiel around it, right? So that's where the impetus of my question
With a
came
good
from.
understanding, yeah, we can follow up after,
Yeah.
but I think, it's dangerous to just pass that data down. You want to be transparent, but you want to make sure that it's framed in a way that folks aren't just going to tell their own stories.
Yeah.
Just very quick note, we use something called Culture Amp that measures employee engagement, and we do share that as an organization out to all our employee base so they can have understanding of our priorities and how we're performing against goals as a culture.
All right.
Uh-oh,
One-
Cindy has the mic, so, we
Yep.
better listen.
Cindy, do we have time for one more, or we pretty much?
We
Okay,
only
one
went
more.
over 35 minutes.
No, but I think there is a
think there's
fair
7.
happening. One more question.
Hi there. So I've been involved in DEI work since 2012, and as you can imagine, there's a huge difference in what my work looked like pre-2020, post-2020. Most of the changes have been very positive. There's a lot more attention. People care about this a lot more. One that I think is a negative is people in the past used to be very open and direct with me about when they were not going to do a DEI initiative, or when they did not think it was worth doing or worth their time. Now, resistance to DEI proposals is much more couched in, that's a great idea, we will get to it after these other things, or this is a wonderful thing, but it's a later stage proposal and we're not ready to focus on that yet. And I would just love to hear, if you're able to share, what are your strategies for overcoming this kind of non-direct resistance?
I would say put it in your procurement documents.
Yeah, put timelines to it.
Get to the C-suite. I know that sounds, I hope that doesn't sound braggadocious, but it's really hard when you're sitting across from a table of 12 people for somebody to push back like that. And so it's a direct challenge at that table, and I just think that that's super important.
So this has been an amazing conversation. I want to thank the three of you for your insight and, more importantly, for your dedication. We need people like you to keep pushing for diversity and inclusion and better outcomes. Can't tell you how much I appreciate the discussion. Couple of things I think that stood out for me. Number one is, all of you said it in different ways, but challenging the archetype, right? Our narrative of what it means to be qualified or what credentials you need. The second thing that was for me is really democratize the process for opportunity. How do we make sure that we're bringing in people from all walks of life that can do the job? So eliminating bachelors and requirements that are unnecessary. Really thinking about how do you create apprenticeship programs so that people can learn and practice and be mentored. How do you think about ensuring that as you're bringing people in that they have the right support and sponsors so that they can have safe space to try things out and make mistakes and fail and try again. I love the conversation about, focusing the work for the demographic you're trying to attract. Figure out how do you keep people in the organization? What do they need? How do you need to be flexible so that you can have a workforce that feels like they're being appreciated and respected and they want to stay? And then how do you use data and information as a starting point, but then to launch it to be able to make sure that you're living your values, that you're bringing people in, and that you're the kind of organization that your employees want to stay and want to be proud of. So thank you. You guys are living, breathing examples of how it's done well. So very much
Thank you for the hard
appreciated.
questions, Mary.
You're welcome. They weren't intended to be hard. So I want to turn it back over. You're going to bring us home.
I'll
Thank you.
try. I will try to bring us home. Where do I begin? I think as I was sitting there and I was just soaking a lot in, first of all, thank you for sharing your knowledge, for sharing your
I
passion.
hope I still have my job tomorrow.
I'm sure we will. But I took some takeaways. I took the importance of making sure that we are present, the importance to voice our opinions and voice our values and voice what we're looking for, but better yet, the importance to look for culture and the importance to look for meaning behind an employer or for those who we want to be a part of an organization. And also took the importance of actually working for something that you believe in, but most of all, taking a look at the data at the numbers and actually breaking that data down and looking at where also are barriers that we don't look at. I always think about that data and numbers are essential, but when you break that data down, you actually begin to see more inequalities that we don't really look at rather than looking at the overall picture. And I think that's something to really think about. I always say equity and inclusion is so much more than just looking at bringing people of color into an organization or into a job. It actually has to break down to even so much more. So I appreciate your acknowledging all your feedback and everything you gave today. I also just want to just mention 2023 is a data collection year. And this is exactly, I'll give great dates. From May 8th to May 22nd, the BWWC, in collaboration with all the compact signers, are going to be collecting amazing data. And this data is going to actually help us have this conversation again, hopefully with better numbers, I hope, next year, and actually think about what can we do as individuals, or what can organizations and employers do to help us close that gender wage gap. So I really want to encourage everyone here to either take a look at the last data from the BWWC that was collected, but better yet, keep in conversation with people who you have met here today, but also encourage your employers to think about being a compact signer, or even to think about having and opening those doors and having those conversations. One housekeeping that I would like to let everyone know, we are offering headshots, so if anyone would like a new headshot, please meet someone in the back. We want to make sure that you have the opportunity to take that away today as well. And then now I would like to invite everyone to our resource fair, where you will have a chance to connect with various employers and organizations. But most of all, if you didn't get a chance to ask questions to our amazing panelists, please take this time to do so. This is your time, but most of all, to engage and learn something new and take something back. And if there's anything that we can continue doing as Women's Advancement and as BWWC, we're also here to support and uplift. Thank you so much for coming, and I really hope you enjoyed the conversation.
You guys are fabulous.
Oh yeah, there's. Are we sitting or standing or? Oh, okay.
Just sit.
Do you want us?
Should we? Okay. I'll stand.
Just hit the hard part.
Yeah, this is the easy part.